Rambam remove the historical elements of the revelation of the Kodesh Baruch Hu if history is the stage that a Kodesh Baruch Hu reveals himself? It's clearly, completely diametrically opposed to what the Kuzari said. So now we can come up with two different answers. One is the Pavlonian response that people normally give. And the second one, we go deep into Mishnah Torah, we're going to see a completely different perspective of the Rambam that we might not have otherwise understood. So the simple Pavlonian knee-jerk reaction response is that the Rambam was a follower of Aristotle. He was at heart a philosopher. Therefore, the Rambam did not want to give a subjective answer to what is the God that the Jewish people believe in, did not want to give it based on experience of the leaving of Egypt, the Jewish experience of the leaving of Egypt, receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, but rather wanted to give a philosophical answer based on objective reality, based on philosophical introspection, and therefore the Rambam is diametrically opposed to the position of the Kuzari. So that is, if you were to ask 99% of people, why would the Rambam disagree with the Kuzari? What is the root of his argument? The answer they would give normally would be the Aristotelian response. It's a philosophical Rambam, and he's going against the Kuzari that's talking from a subjective perspective. But I want to raise two sources, and then what I heard from the Rosh Yeshiva, and you can see and how it fits into Rav Kook in just a second. So source number one is not on our famous source sheet that we have here on my Word document, but rather I'm going to quote how the Rambam relates to Leil Seder. Remember, those of you who join us a little bit late, what I want to try and understand today is why this Leil Seder is different from all other starim that we've ever experienced in our life, and how we are here as individuals as opposed to being part of a community, and even family members may not even be able to join us. So when the Rambam describes Leil Seder, you know what, I want to go one step back, and I'd like to perhaps just give a little bit of an introduction to the distinction between the Kuzari and the Rambam. And it all depends on perspective. From a perspective of Galut, if you're living in Galut, you're living in exile, then clearly the present doesn't particularly interest you. One's connected to the past, remembering the brilliant past that one experienced, and one is definitely much connected to a deep anticipation for the future. So history has a tremendous importance. History and the movement of time is of great importance to someone who's living in a state that is not natural to them. One is connected to the past of what was, and one is connected in anticipation for a brilliant future of what hopefully Bezrat Hashem will be. That is the Kuzari. So he's living in his present moment. The Kuzari is sitting in the middle of Spain, but at the same time, he's in the base of Mikdash in the past, and he's sitting in the third temple in the future, and he is literally history and time is all connected into the present. That's how Rabbi Yehuda's Jewish existence is revealed. And therefore, the concept of leaving of Egypt, the subjective connection to the past and where we're moving in the future is very important. However, I'd like to make the suggestion that the Rambam does not understand the concept of Churban. From a halachic theological perspective, the Rambam does not understand the concept of Churban. It's almost that it doesn't exist. It happens right now. We are unable to perform certain things, but the Rambam is a Mishnah Torah of Messianic times. Now, I want to prove this from a couple of areas. Number one, the Mishnah Torah was the first codified law that didn't just deal with laws that pertain to Orach Chaim, to mod everyday activities, but the Rambam's talking about the laws of Korbanot. They're talking about the laws of Sanhedrin, the wars of the kings of Israel, as equally as he talks about the laws of Brachot and Kashrut, Isur Veheter and Mikvah. So the Rambam's Mishnah Torah is a complete codification of how the essence of Torah should be expressed not in exilic times, but in times of redemption. What I heard from the Rosh Yeshiva is that in order to be part of the Sanhedrin, he proved this from a number of sources. But what I heard from the Rosh Yeshiva going back a couple of years is that when the Rambam says that a member of the Sanhedrin needs to know the entire Torah backwards and forwards, he was basically saying, he almost says it, that what the Sanhedrin needs, because how are we going to find 71 sages or 70 sages that know every single word of the Torah and know them backwards and forwards? So the Rambam basically is saying that I've got the solution. Learn my Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah, according to the Rambam, was the document, was the constitution of the Jewish people. That's what he meant by you don't need to learn Gemara anymore. Learn my Mishnah Torah, because that is the constitution of the Jewish people in the times of redemption. He lived in redemption. He didn't understand the concepts, the confines of exile. And I want to prove this to you from two different sources. The first one is how he describes Leil Seder. If I was to ask you, if you look at Shulchan Aruch, if you talk about Leil Seder, the Shulchan Aruch talks about matzah, talks about maror, talks about the Seder that we know it today, but the Rambam refuses to accept that we're in exile. Listen to the way that the Rambam describes. The Rambam talks about the following. He says, we make Kiddush, then we make wash hands, Tovlim it to Karpas, then we remove the table, then we pour the second course. The son asks Manishtana, his father answers, we say Avadim Hainu, after this we drink a second cup, and then we eat the matzot. We take the matzot and make two blessings. Then you eat a kazayit of the matzah as you're reclining. Then you bring in front of him the korban of the chagiga. Then you bring the korban Pesach. On the chagiga, you make the bracha lecholet to zevach. Al korban Pesach, you make the bracha of achilat psachim. And then he says, in matter of fact, last sentence. But if it just so happens the Beis Hamikdash ain't kayam, he says mevorech al achilat maror. The Rambam, when he describes Leil Seder, describes Leil Seder as it is, as it should be. Oh, and by the way, if you happen not to be living with the temple is actually existing, then there's a few changes. But the Rambam's perspective is one of redemption. He doesn't, and someone who's living in that state, when you're living in a state of redemption, you're not thinking about the past or the future. You're able to experience the present. In fact, the Kuzari says that why is it? In the times of the first temple, the Jewish people, there's practically no mentioning of the world to come. There's no mentioning about individual life after death. There's barely no mention of it. It's only in the second temple period that suddenly the Jewish people and Rabbanan start to talk about concepts of Tchiyat HaMeitim and the resurrection of the dead and life after death. Because if you'd ask someone, this is what I heard from Rav Shirky, if you ask someone who's living in temple times, the first temple, when there is prophecy that is surrounding us, if you'd ask them what interests you, they'll tell you, I'm interested in growing my fields, that my king should be well, that we should win our wars, and the Jewish people should be safe. When you're living amongst prophets, you don't have questions about life after death. It's not even interesting because you're experiencing the living God in front of you. So time is almost irrelevant. But only if someone's living in Galus, suddenly one remembers the nostalgia of the past and the brilliant future that one anticipates. So now let's bring a second source. I have that on the, hopefully I quoted this. The Rambam, yeah, the Ficha, okay. The Rambam refuses to believe that the temple is destroyed halachically, to the point that the Rambam says we are obligated in all the korbanot. But what? We're anusim, we're unable to do it. So whilst other Rishonim say that there is no temple, the Kedusha of the Temple Mount may not be sanctified anymore, and therefore we are not obligated in the Korbanot, the Rambam stubbornly refuses to accept that position. Rather, we are obligated. We're obligated in Korban Pesach today that we were 2,000 years ago. We're obligated in the Korbanot of Rosh Chodesh and of every day, the Tmidim of every day, just like we always were. We are anusim. It's just we're unable to do it, but it's not that we're not obligated. Yeah.
Baruch. But we're obligated, but we don't know the place, and therefore is that a difference? No one is saying we're not obligated, but if we don't know where to do it, then that's the stumbling block.
So that's an argument. The argument is whether there's any obligation whatsoever. You're correct that we have some issues of how we do it, from all manner of reasons why we can't do it. But the Ravad, for example, maybe would say that we're not obligated. There's no Kedusha to the Temple Mount. The obligation no longer exists. In fact, there's a machlokas in the Rishonim. But the Rambam's position is consistent throughout Mishnah Torah. He doesn't understand the concept of galus. The galus idea is a weird reality that doesn't really exist in the halachic world, right? The temple's destruction has no significance. We cry over the bricks. We don't cry over the Shekhinah, which still is there. We don't cry over that, the lack of the obligation of mitzvahs that no longer are valid. They're still there. All right, anyway, that's the Rambam's perspective. So both the Rambam and the Kuzari, therefore, see significance in historical events. Now, I want to move forward. Even though the Rambam was living in an existence of redemption, and the Kuzari felt very deeply he was living in exile, and therefore had a tremendous panging and anticipation to the future. Now, this leads me to Rav Kook. And this is where we're going to get into the personal service of Kodesh Baruch Hu, that each and every one of us is now absolutely obligated. And if it wasn't clear, in a couple of days when there may be a complete seger, we're all going to be living completely by ourselves. We're not even going to be able to go out, venture out for minyanim of 10 people. So let's go into Rav Kook. Rav Kook writes a book. It's not really a book, it's a ma'amar, it's an essay, that Malach Eideot B'Yisrael. He writes a book of the story of history. It's one of the most incredible essays that I've ever seen in Rav Kook. I don't claim to be a complete Baki in Rav Kook, but this is a stunning essay that describes how basically the world is evolving and how we are moving from plan A, from the beginning of time to the time of redemption, and how certain events in the history of the world move us in the direction towards redemption. So he'll start from the Jewish people, from the giving of from the Yetziat Mitzrayim, entering into Eretz Israel, and the destruction of the temples, the return of the Jewish people, and everything that the Jewish people experience. First of all, it's clear to us, by the way, before we even get to Rav Kook, Rabbi Yehuda Levi says that the Jewish people are the heart of the nations, majority of its pain and also for the good. We are integrally connected to the nations of the world. If there is a world event, the Jewish people will always be hurt. The heart will be hurt. You know, we are connected to the nations of the world. We see that today. That's another indication, another wake-up call, if you like, that the Jewish people's service of Kodesh Baruch Hu as a nation is there in order to serve humanity. It's not there to serve ourselves. That's part and parcel of what we're learning also during the what's going on right now. But let's go back to Rav Kook. So Rav Kook writes this book called The Malach Eideot B'Yisrael. It's based on the Platonic and a concept of Hegel. I want to explain that concept, and then we'll understand how this fits together, and specifically what we're called on to do today, which I think is pure Rav Kook. And maybe he would say it, I don't know, but I just want to bring this point home. So what did Plato say? First of all, Rav Kook uses a very Platonic word, eideot, what you may say in English ideals or ideas. But eideot are heavenly constructs. These are heavenly constructs that find their way like a shadow, like a person with a shadow. The shadow is not the person, but it's a reflection of the person. So the eideot is like the person, and the shadow is like the eideot that manifest themselves in this world. So concepts that we understand to be true in this world, in fact, just reflections of what they really are in the real worlds. So, for example, what the classic example of Plato is the concept of a triangle. So we only see the reflection of the triangle. An actual triangle we don't see. The numbers, these aren't numbers. These are just a ramification or just a reflection of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they're not the numbers in essence. So all we see in this world is the reflection of ideals in the real world of that Kodesh Baruch Hu brings into this world. Now we're going to go one step further from Plato and to Hegel. Hegel goes one step further, and this is where Rav Kook fits in. Hegel says the following. By the way, the Rav Kook was not based on Hegel. It's based on Kabbalah. The Malach Eideot B'Yisrael has a lot of Kabbalistic connections, but he's using philosophical terminology because they're easier to understand. So Hegel goes one step further than Plato and says that these ideals, they reflect into this world and they become revealed in history. History is that theater that the ideals reveal themselves. And the entire history of the world is basically the theater in which those ideals become revealed. Now, Rav Kook has this essay based on these two terms, these two ideas, and wants to say that the entire history of the world are based on two ideals. Two ideals we're going to see in Rav Kook just a minute. I've quoted it on the right-hand side of the page. Two ideals, and that is, number one, ha'edea ha'elokit, and that is every individual inside of their DNA, it is unavoidable, has a connection, a panging, a desire to connect to the external, to Kodesh Baruch Hu. That is just part, every individual has it, whether the person tries to suppress it, but it's there, it exists. So you can mentally suppress it, but it's something that exists, and it always will reveal itself in some way, whether in a positive way or in a negative way, but it always will reveal itself. That's the Eideya Ha'elokit. The other one, the second ideal, or concept that is revealed over time is the idea haleumit, is a national connection where I remove myself from myself and connect to other people, first as a community, then as a nation. Now we're going to see the difference between the nations of the world, the Jewish people, and Pesach, and we're going to start tying everything together with what I said at the very beginning. So how are nations created? And what does it do to the Jewish people and all nations of the world? So Rav Kook talks about a process that every single nation is created through. Number one, there is this godly connection that individuals have. They connect, first of all, as a community. Historically, we know this to be, if you look at the history of any nation, there's a tribe. So an individual turns into a small community or into a tribe. And then they start building structures to be able to reflect, to be able to reveal the identity that those individuals have, i.e. their connection to God, based on the geography of where they are living, and based on the climate that they are living, and the external factors that allow them to reveal that ideal, the godly ideal that's inside of every individual. So now you have a structure called a community. Now those communities connect with other communities and create a nation. So that is step number one. First of all, there is an ideal, a godly ideal that individuals have. They get together and create the second ideal, which is the national ideal, which comes second. It's a historical process. The identity. Yeah, I was muted. Whoever's muted me, try not to mute me. Okay, thanks. So it wasn't me. Okay, so let me go back. You can mute everyone else. BP is me, by the way. Mute other people if you like. Let me mute. Actually, I don't have control of this. Mark, I think you're the only one that can mute everyone if you want, apart from me. Okay, so communities develop into a nation, but it's a process. It starts with the individual, leads into community, leads into a nation. The godliness, the godly ideal connects with the desire of individuals to live inside of communities outside of themselves. They build countries or build nations. That is the history of nations. Now, step two in the process happens every single time. It's interesting if you take a look at each individual nation, but especially today, I think it's very profound what Rav Kook says. The second step is that the national structure becomes very, very defined, becomes well-established, well-structured, and starts to take on an importance in its own right, to the point that there is a development that instead of the national identity, i.e. the connection, the godly connection, being the thing that motivates or moves the nation forward, suddenly the internal structures of nationalism become the center of everything. What we might call fascism, or we might call a loyalty to the state that supersedes a loyalty to God. So what happens is that becomes the nationality becomes the God of the people as opposed to God himself. And this happens throughout. If you look, for example, today, the absolute concept, the desire that democracy is the highest of all ideals. Where does that come from? It comes from exactly this, that the minute that instead of fusing the godly ideal into the national structure takes on a life of its own. The Knesset, the government, becomes the decision maker of all of the society, as opposed to something from a heavenly perspective. So what happens is that nations suddenly get intoxicated by the structures that they built that's meant to reflect their national identity, which is the Idea Elokit, and instead of allowing it to come from above, it comes from within, leads to a fascism or into a indoctrination or an overemphasis on the national structure. There's a third part of the process, Rav Kook says, every single time. After a while, people just suddenly, it self-implodes, this national structure. People are sick because it doesn't provide them with the identity that they're looking for. It's not enough to say that democracy or that the nationhood or that the army is reflective of their ideals, of their highest ideals, because in our DNA, it's not enough. So what happens is there's a decentralization of that structure. We lead into the realm of individuality, where people basically don't even believe in the state anymore. They don't believe in the country. Rather, everyone does what they want. Everyone. And what happens is, Rav Kook says, the fourth step is that you lead to a idealization of individual ta'avot and inappropriate behavior. There is no musar, there's no godliness, and basically there is self-destruction. That is the 4 steps of every single nation. We see it today, basically, and to the point that the structures of the nation become so strong in that second and third part that I described, that there's a rejection of godliness, to the point that if someone was to come along from the world of the idea ha'elokut, for example, the church would come and say, hey, we're going to take over the country, people would reject it. Because the structures of the nationhood are so strong that no one with a religious, no one that's coming from the other perspective would even know how to run such a country. There are examples in Europe throughout the medieval period, Pope against the Caesar, and thereafter, where there was a complete separation of church from state because the church could never take control of the state, wouldn't know how to. All right, that is the 4 steps of every single nation. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Because this is the very source of the very essence of the difference of the Jewish people from the nations of the world. If we understand this, we understand our role. And now I'm going to tie it into our experience this year, especially as we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu from a very personal perspective. So what Rav Kook says, and he has a Ma'amara here, this is in Mamrei Ariyah, which the Orech of Mamrei Ariyah is Rav Lisha Aviner, Shlita of Mitzpeh Nevo, invited to join us in good times. So he has a mama on Matzah Zu. So normally we understand, let's just read the beginning, it's on the source sheet. There's a couple of words, there's a few lines that are missing. I only printed the second page, there's only one bit pages, but I'll just read the first few lines which you're missing. So we say Matzah Zu, we read in the Haggadah, Matzah Zu she'anu ochlim al Shema, why do we eat this matzah? Al shum shelo speak b'tzakam shel avotenu lachmitz. Right, the dough of our forefathers did not become leaven until Kadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to the Jewish people and redeemed them. Now, what is the significance of the matzah? Why is this part of the national identity? We see something absolutely amazing that Rav Kook says. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, emetu netzach ve'en tmot emet ve'en ava b'netzach. It says the Jewish people is a nation of netzach, of eternity. La'ad u'le'olam kayamhu ot and netzach, eternity, that the letter of eternity lasts forever. And what the Rav Kook is going to say, we're going to even skip to, you can read this by yourselves afterwards. But what Rav Kook is going to say, and this is absolutely brilliant, is that the difference between the nations of the world and the Jewish people is that, as Rav Kook described in the first parak of the Malach Edeyot B'Yisrael, and then in the second parak, he basically says what he says in this Ma'amar over here, is that the difference that the Jewish people were not created in sequence, that there was, first of all, a Deya HaElokit that eventually found a nation, but rather a Kodesh Baruch Hu, when the Jewish people were being formed as a nation in sterile location, i.e. Egypt in 40 years of the desert, before they could become chametz, before the nationhood could become chametz and therefore could become over-intoxicated in itself, there Kodesh Baruch Hu revealed himself before the Jewish people became chametz and redeemed them. And we know in the laws of matzah, incredible. You put your water and your flour and your water together. You stick in the oven 18 minutes, for less than 18 minutes. That's matzah. You take it out of the oven. You turn it into kemach matzah. You can stick it in the oven as long as you want. Once you have something which is matzah, it cannot become chametz. The Jewish people were formed in a way that they cannot be chametz. The unity of these two Eideyot, one of the Eideya Elokit, and two, the national identity, they are fused together in less than 18 minutes before they could become chametz. Kodesh Baruch Hu revealed himself. In other words, the national identity and the spiritual identity were interrelated immediately before it could become chametz. That's something that lasts forever, and never like matzah meal. You can stick it in the oven and make a nice cake out of it, and it will never become matzah. And it never will become chametz. So to the Jewish people, the infusion of these two ideals can never be separated. Now, I'm going to go one step further. I just left you the source. Maybe I'll send it over to you as a Word document, David, to you, and you can hand it out to everyone. But it's in Mamrei Ariyah. Now, the Jewish people, these two things can never be separated. The national identity and our godly identity. Let's take two extreme scenarios. And we see that even in extremities, these two things remain absolutely connected one to the other. So number one, let's talk about exile. What happens in exile? In exile, it would appear that we've lost our national identity. We've also lost, to a degree, our godly identity. Two things fall to pieces in exile. The national identity is clear. We no longer have an army and a navy. We no longer have a country and a centralized area that we live in. We now disperse to the four corners of the earth. That makes sense. It's certainly, we've lost our national identity. But our godly identity, where we have Nevi'im, we have prophets that are intermingling with the Jewish people, where there's a natural connection to Kodesh Baruch. You don't need to be speaking about the world to come. It's just obvious. Suddenly that gets replaced with a third idea. What is the third idea that replaces Ha'idiyah Ha'elokit? It happens only at the time of the Second Temple. It is the source of the Gemara. It is the source of our Avodat Hashem till today, and that is the Idea Hadatit, our religious ideal. Religion. John Lennon was wrong. Imagine there was no religion. He was right. So he wasn't wrong. He was right. Rav Kook says that in essence, we're not religion. Religion is a result of galut, of exile. It's a new reality. We no longer have prophecy. We no longer experience a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Instead, everything comes filtered down into Dinei D'Rabbanan. The vast majority of all Shulchan Aruch, I don't know if anyone's ever counted percentage-wise, but I venture to guess 98% of Shulchan Aruch are rabbinic enactments. They're enacted at the time of the Second Temple, when we're going into, in preparation for exile. We become a religion. Now there's a ramification for the Jewish people becoming a religion. We're now talking philosophically. We're now talking about the world to come. We're talking about that you need to do this and do that in order to connect to Kodesh Baruch Hu. Suddenly, the nations of the world recognize that there is a way, the Jewish people have now revealed a way that you can connect to God. If we're talking philosophically, a Gentile can also connect to God that way, which is the beginning of all religion. Christianity, the destruction of the temple, these two things go together. When the Jewish people, when prophecy comes to an end and religion comes in comes to replace it, suddenly the nations of the world are connected to this concept and religion is born and it becomes an international issue. The Jews are now connected to all nations of the world because of our lowly level. Now, Rav Kook was the last one to say there's any benefits of galut whatsoever, but he says afterwards, when we return home, we will recognize there was a little inkling of benefit of us being in exile, and that is the nations of the world were able to absorb some of the concepts of what we're talking about, even if these concepts are completely misinterpreted and interpreted by their idea elokit, and therefore will be written down and explained in a way that are foreign to Jewish essence, but still there's some concepts that they are beginning to understand. Now, even though the idea elokit is now on a lowly level, it becomes the idea hadatit, a religious expression instead of a godly expression. Even though the national movement is no longer there, still they both exist. And this is where you see the greatness of the Netzach of Yisrael that Rav Kook's talking about in Matzah. Where do we see that? Even when the Jewish people are in exile, the horror, there is no Jewish people. The Jewish people are connected by community. The kihila, the concept of kihila, the community, is a microcosm of the Jewish people. The Beit Knesset that's inside of a community is almost like the shagrirut of the Jewish people in that foreign country, in that foreign city. The shul becomes the meeting place, the microcosm of Klal Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael. By the way, we see this in the Gemara. If I say this just in brackets, the Gemara says that it's a famous Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, I believe, Eikes Sabik Bavel, the famous Gemara in Brachot, where Rabbi Yochanan is told that there are elderly people in Bavel, and he says, how can that be? It says the it says you have a long life in the land of Israel. Only in Eretz Yisrael you have a long life. You can't have a long life in Chutz La'aretz, says the Gemara. They told Rabbi Yochanan because these are the people that went into the shul early in the morning, that they were late to leave in the night. He says, now I understand. That's why they have a long life. But the Pasuk says you can only have a long life in the land of Israel. From here we learn that going into a Beit Knesset is almost, it's not the same thing, but it's a microcosm of being part of Klal Yisrael and being part of the land of Israel. So what we see from here is that even though it's on a very lowly level, and instead of Jews dealing with incredible things like building an economy and an army, instead we're dealing, the Gabbai Tzedakah is dealing with giving money to the poor people in the communities. Instead of dealing with national issues, he's dealing with the kashrus of the local grocer and the local butcher. the rabbi is dealing with minute issues of Orach Chaim, still, there is still a national identity, but it's brought down in a very, very, very shallow form. The community is a microcosm of Klal Israel, of the Jewish identity of the land of Israel and of the nation of Israel. So even in Galut, the concept of Klal Israel, of the nation of Israel, Le'umiyut, still exists. We already said that the Eidei HaElokit still exists in the format of religion. Everything is watered down. Now we're going to take the second extreme case. Comes along, the Jewish people return, 1948, the Jewish people return. The Eidei HaLeumit returns to the forefront. We are a nation, the Israeli nation, to the point that Eliezer ben Yehuda said a horrible statement such as, now that we've returned home, there's no more need for religion. Ahadam, many of the great poets and the early Zionists said that now we've returned home, the Eidei HaLeumit is prevalent. We no longer need religion. Obviously, that's a mistake. But listen to this, just to prove that these two things are forged together forever. They can never be separated. Like the matzah that didn't have enough time to turn into chametz, which is why these two ideas of godliness and nationalism are united in the Jewish people and never will be separated. Here's the proof. Eliezer ben Yehuda says, we don't need religion. Rather, we're going to talk about nationalism. But here's Ben Yehuda, where did you stick the national nationhood of the Jewish people? Oh, in the Holy Land. Oh, and you're going to resurrect the Jewish language. Very good, Eliezer, but that happens to be Lashon HaKodesh. So even Eliezer ben Yehuda, with all of his desire to remove from religion, basically revives the two greatest fundamentals of religious belief of the Eidei HaElokit, the Holy Land and the Holy Language. So he didn't do such a good job as a secularist. We have to give him a 0 out of 10 for that. But that's because the Jewish people, you can never sever the interreaction. That is why we eat matzah on Pesach, to show that there's no chametz between these two ideals. They are forged one together. Now I'm going to go one final step, and then we can get back to today. And that final step is looking at the difference between the first temple and the second temple. The first temple, the connection, and Rav Kook talks this, the golden era of the Jewish people, where these two ideals are interconnected one with the other, to the point that we basically, the national identity and the godly identity were working in unison. So Shlomo Melech, everyone, they said that the tables in the time of Shlomo Melech was like a king's table. The Jewish people were blessed with a bounty on a physical level. Everyone was extremely affluent, and the nation was serving the Kodesh Baruch Hu on a national level. However, Rav Kook says that only worked from the perspective of Klal Yisrael, from a national perspective, but on an individual level, the service of Kodesh Baruch Hu was very, very weak. Which is why for the three big Avirot, when Chazal say that the first temple was destroyed because of the three Avirot, the three big sins, Shrichutam min Avodah Zarah, Retzach, why Shrichutam and Glui Arayot? It was destroyed for the three big sins, to show that on an individual level, the Musar of individuals was so connected to Klal Yisrael that they understood the concept of the Torah, but only as a nation. It did not seep into the individual reality. So the first temple was focused on of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people as a nation, but as individuals it was very low, and that's how the temple gets destroyed. And then we see the complete opposite. The second temple, Ribui of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the massive increase in the oral law, massive amounts of rabbinic legislation. Ask yourselves, why was it written in the second temple? The Gemara is full of rabbinic enactments. Why not in the first temple? Because the second temple, there is a major transformation. This is what Rav Kook writes his essay on, the transformation of the revelation of Kodesh Baruch Hu through history. The second temple period is the time of individuality. Therefore, the Torah turns from an all-encompassing book that connects the Am Yisrael as a nation to Kodesh Baruch Hu and focuses on Orach Chaim, the laws of everyday individual service of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's the second temple period. And Rav Kook says brilliantly, if I just fast forward to the final chapter of the essay, everyone should read the Ma'alach Idiot Yisrael, because it's one of the greatest essays I've ever read. I'm sure you'd enjoy it as well. Is at the end, the third temple is the combination of all three they return in unison. The Jewish people returns home. There is now a national movement, but the national movement will not tolerate a watered down religious expression of how Eideha Elokit, secularization according to Rav Kook, is simply that the national identity will not tolerate, because will not tolerate a watering down of our connection to Kodesh Baruch Hu. Therefore, there's going to be a secular attack on religion in order for Am Yisrael to rise, and it's waiting for the reunification of all these Eideyot together, the national identity through our connection, our Eloki with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and yes, also through the prism of our Eideya HaDatit, our religious expression that we have formulated over the last 2,000 years. And therefore, 1948, the Jewish people returned. 1967, nationhood is stronger than ever. We are serving Kodesh Baruch Hu in this country as a nation and as religious people in this nation. We serve Kodesh Baruch Hu in our communities. We're almost restricted as individuals. The concept of individuality have almost been, in this world that we're living in, sometimes are put to the side because we think about the national interest of the Jewish people. And here we are today. Right now, Kodesh Baruch Hu, whether we like it or not, is telling us one thing, and I'm not giving reasons, I'm just simply saying the reality. That Kodesh Baruch Hu is calling upon us as individuals to find a way to inspire ourselves as individuals, removed from our communities. We can't even daven in a minyan, in my opinion, but I'm not saying halachically, just from what I read between the lines of what's going on. We shouldn't even be davening in 10 people in the street with the Kriyas Torah, which is a disaster, where there is people standing next to one another. It's almost unavoidable. So, and even Mr. Rabbi said it's unavoidable, we shouldn't be doing it. It's almost as if we assume we're all going to have to do it. We haven't realized it already. And Rav Melamed said, as I said at the very beginning, L'chatchila, you should daven by yourself. If you b'di'evet, you can't find inspiration by yourself, and you absolutely feel you need to daven with 9 other people, b'di'evet should be b'di'evet. Go outside and find 9 other people and daven with them. But that's b'di'evet. L'chatchila, we should find a resolve, because that's the calling of the day, to find a way to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu as individuals. And when we do that, we have the shiluv, the combination of individual service Kodesh Baruch Hu as part of our community, as part of our nation in Eretz Israel. That is the shiluv, that is the combination of the 3 ideals that Rav Kook has spoken about. That basically is the blueprint for the resurrection of the temple, the 3rd temple, which we hopefully will see speedily. So I hope everyone here should be well, yourselves and your families. And most important, I think, during this time this is almost like a Shemitah. Someone told me, this is like a Shemitah. Kodesh Baruch Hu is asking us, you know what, you want to work? Forget about it. Most of us can't work. Most of us, literally, the only thing we can do is to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu by keeping our family safe, not leaving our houses, not for a minyanim on the streets, not minyanim by the bus stop, nothing. Serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu as individuals and finding l'chatchila, as Rav Melamed says, finding the inspiration to be able to daven as individuals, to learn as individuals in this format and finding other formats that we can learn in. And I just want to end by saying that whoever organized this set of shiurim is doing an incredible job, because even as individuals, we can still connect to others in a way that is safe and is protecting ourselves and our families. So this Pesach, more than ever, we recognize when we eat the matzah, how that identity is fused together at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and how that identity can never change, however the format. And our obligation today is to find as individuals the way to inspire ourselves, that we can then, when we go back to our communities, we can be stronger and greater. So anyway, I wish everyone a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was outstanding. It was outstanding. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Mordecai, Mark, thank you very much for recording.
Right. Mark, I like the backdrop, by the way. That's perfect. Thank you. You can change it for the next year. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, but next year you'll have to have a bigger one, because you'll be standing in front of everybody.
We're looking for it says that we can do that, we can do that. But right now, stay tight.
Say that. Have a Kashul Pesach. Thank you very much, Baruch. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good meeting. Bye-bye.